This story contains themes of mystery, psychological suspense, and unsettling events which some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. The first thing you notice about Oakhaven isn't the charming general store or the quaint, century-old church steeple peeking through the canopy. No, the only thing that truly arrests your senses is the smell. A deep, resinous perfume of pine needles, damp earth, and something else. Something ancient and undeniably cold. It saturates the air, clings to your clothes, and settles deep in your lungs, a constant, low hum beneath everything else. And then there's the sound. Not the wind, not exactly. More like a collective sigh, a ceaseless, sibilant whisper that seems to emanate from the very heart of the towering pine forest that encircles the town like a dark, silent sentinel. They call it the whisper of the pines, and it's a sound I've known my entire life. A sound that used to soothe me, but now it only chills me to the bone. My name is Emily Hayes, and a year ago, I packed up my life in the city and drove back to Oakhaven. A decision born not of choice but of necessity. My father, Arthur Hayes, a man as enigmatic and deeply rooted in this town as the oldest pine, had died. Unexpectedly. Mysteriously. The official report cited a heart attack, alone in his secluded cabin, nestled deep within the very woods he loved and feared. But a part of me, a deep primal instinct, rejected that neat explanation. My father was a man of routines, a man who documented everything, a man who saw patterns where others saw only chaos. And his death felt like a broken pattern. I had come back to clear out his cabin, to sort through the remnants of a life lived largely in solitude, to sell the property, and then to escape the suffocating embrace of Oakhaven once more. But the pines, it seemed, had other plans for me. Oakhaven itself is a relic, a postcard of forgotten America, a single main street, a diner where the coffee is perpetually burnt, a library that smells of old paper and dust, and a population that seems to have perfected the art of watchful silence. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows everyone's business, or at least the business they want you to know. Outsiders are tolerated, barely, and returning natives like me are viewed with a mixture of suspicion and pity. I was Arthur Hayes's daughter, the one who left, the one who returned. The cabin, my childhood home, stood exactly as he'd left it. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight slicing through the tall windows, illuminating the stacks of books, the worn armchair, the overflowing workbench in the corner. His scent, a mix of pipe tobacco, pine resin, and old paper, still lingered, a ghostly presence. But it wasn't just the cabin that felt haunted. It was the town itself. 3 weeks before I arrived, Oakhaven had lost one of its own. Sarah Jenkins, a vibrant, free-spirited artist, known for her intricate wood carvings of local wildlife. She had gone for a hike near the Whispering Pines Overlook, a popular, yet notoriously treacherous, trail that wound deep into the forest, and simply vanished. Her car was found in the parking lot, her phone in her cabin, but Sarah herself? Gone. The search had been extensive, involving every able-bodied person in town, but they found nothing. No trace, no struggle, just an empty space where a person used to be. The official verdict, delivered with a shrug and a sigh by Sheriff David Miller, a man I'd gone to high school with, was lost in the vast wilderness. Another unfortunate soul claimed by the indifference of the pines. But the town's reaction felt off, too quick to accept, too eager to move on. It was as if Sarah's disappearance was merely an inconvenience, a disruption to the quiet rhythm of their lives, rather than a tragedy. And the whispers, the ones that weren't from the trees, were even more chilling. Whispers about Sarah's eccentricities, her wandering mind. Hints that she might have just chosen to leave, to disappear on her own terms. But I knew Sarah. She was rooted here, despite her artistic flights of fancy. She wouldn't just leave. Not like that. As I began the arduous task of sifting through my father's life, a disquieting pattern began to emerge. His journals, meticulously kept, filled with his elegant looping script, weren't just mundane records. They were chronicles. Of local folklore, certainly, but also of something darker. Stories of people who had vanished from Oakhaven over the decades, dismissed as runaways or unfortunate accidents. But my father had drawn connections, highlighted coincidences, sketched maps of the forest with strange symbols marking specific, remote locations. He had been investigating something he kept hidden even from me. One particular entry caught my eye, dated just 2 days before his death. The handwriting was shaky, urgent. "The pattern is undeniable," it read. The shadows are moving. The whispers, they're growing louder. They're calling. She was right. The pines have eyes. Below it, a crude drawing. A stylized pine tree with what looked like an eye peering from its trunk. And a single underlined word, Jenkins. My breath hitched. Sarah Jenkins. My father knew something about her disappearance. Or perhaps about the reason for it. Later that week, Sheriff Miller paid me a visit. He stood on the porch, a tall, imposing figure, his uniform crisp, his eyes once warm and kind in high school, now guarded and weary. He offered his condolences again, lingered on small talk about the weather, the state of the cabin. But his gaze kept flicking to the dense woods surrounding the property, and his questions, though casual, felt like fishing lines, probing for information. Any trouble settling in, Emily? He asked, his voice low. Woods can be disorienting after being away so long, especially with all the talk about Sarah. Best to stick to the marked trails. It wasn't a warning, not overtly, but the underlying message was clear. Mind your own business. But the more I sorted, the more I read, the more I felt the weight of Oakhaven's secrets pressing down on me, the less I could ignore it. My father hadn't just died. He had been on the verge of uncovering something profound, something dangerous. And the whispers, the incessant, sibilant rustle of the pines, no longer sounded like benign wind. They sounded like 1,000 hushed voices, murmuring secrets, calling my name. One afternoon, seeking a break from the claustrophobia of the cabin, I decided to tackle the old, dilapidated shed behind the house. My father had always kept it locked, a place for his tools and forgotten projects. The air inside was thick with the smell of sawdust, rust, and something vaguely metallic. I pulled open a dusty drawer in his workbench, filled with old chisels and carving knives, and my fingers brushed against something smooth, cold, and out of place. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a robin with delicate feathers etched into the wood, painted in vibrant shades of red and brown. My blood ran cold. This wasn't my father's style. This was Sarah Jenkins's signature work. I had seen her selling identical pieces at the local craft fair just a few years ago. But this one was different. It was partially damaged, a hairline crack running across its back, as if it had been roughly torn from something. And then I saw it, tucked inside a tiny, almost invisible cavity on the bird's underside. A minuscule piece of paper, rolled so tightly it was barely a speck. My fingers trembled as I unrolled it. On it, in what looked like Sarah's distinctive handwriting, was a single hastily scribbled word, watch, and beneath it a string of numbers. Coordinates that, when I later plugged them into my father's old GPS device, pointed not to a marked trail, not to a known landmark, but to a patch of incredibly dense, uncharted wilderness deep within the whispering pines. A place so remote, so overgrown, that even the most seasoned hunters avoided it. The silence that followed was deafening, far more terrifying than any whisper. My father's death, Sarah's disappearance, the town's unsettling complacency, the cryptic journal entries, this bird. It all coalesced into a chilling certainty. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been investigating something terrifying, something that had claimed Sarah Jenkins, and something that was now reaching out to claim me. The pines weren't just whispering secrets, they were guarding them. And I was now standing at the very edge of their dark, silent embrace. What exactly were they watching? And what horrors lay hidden, waiting for me, deep within the heart of the whisper of the pines? My heart, a frantic drum in my chest, hammered against the quiet of the wilderness. The pines stood, black and impenetrable, their silence a heavy blanket over the land. It wasn't just the darkness or the sheer scale of the forest that was unnerving. It was the feeling of being watched, of an ancient presence that had seen countless dawns and dusks, holding untold secrets within its depths. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the chill of the evening seeping into my bones, a primal fear coiling in my gut. But beneath the fear, a different sensation began to stir. A potent, irresistible curiosity. I had come to this remote corner of the world, to this dilapidated cabin nestled on the fringe of the Oakhaven wilderness, seeking solitude. An escape from the relentless demands of city life. A place where the air was clean and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the call of unseen birds. I had envisioned days spent writing, nights under a canopy of stars, a tranquil existence. I hadn't prepared for the profound, unsettling quiet that hummed beneath the surface of this place, or the way the pines seemed to lean in, whispering not of peace but of warning. The next morning, the sun, though bright, did little to dispel the lingering unease. The shadows still clung to the forest line deep and dark, even in the full light of day. My cabin, a ramshackle structure that had clearly seen better centuries, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a temporary shelter against an encroaching unknown. I needed supplies. Essentials like bread, milk, and coffee were quickly running low, and the nearest town, Oakhaven, was my only option. The drive into Oakhaven was short but felt like a journey into another time. The paved road quickly gave way to gravel, winding past fields of overgrown corn and houses that looked like they had been standing since before the invention of the automobile. Oakhaven itself was a blink-and-you-miss kind of place. A single main street, lined with a handful of buildings that seemed to sag under the weight of decades. A post office, a gas station that looked permanently closed, and a general store that proudly proclaimed Eleanor's Goods in faded hand-painted letters. I parked my beat-up truck and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air here was different from at the cabin. It was heavy with the scent of pine sap and something else, something vaguely metallic like old iron. There were only a few other people on the street, mostly older folks, moving with a slow, deliberate pace. They all seemed to glance my way, their eyes lingering a moment too long, before returning to their business. It wasn't overtly hostile, but it was certainly unwelcoming. The kind of scrutiny that made you feel like an alien dropped onto a foreign planet. Eleanor's Goods was dim inside, smelling of dust, dried herbs, and floor wax. Shelves crammed with everything from canned goods to fishing lures, gardening tools to yellowed newspapers. Behind a battered wooden counter stood a woman who I immediately knew must be Eleanor. She was small, with a surprisingly strong presence, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, a startling shade of blue, seemed to miss nothing. She was probably in her late 60s, but there was a sharpness to her gaze that suggested she had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her voice raspy but not unkind. It was the kind of voice that sounded like it had been used to tell a lot of stories. "Just picking up some groceries," I replied, trying to sound casual, despite the uncomfortable feeling of her scrutiny. "I just moved into the old Miller cabin out by the pines." A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed her face. Her blue eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Ah, the Miller place," she said slowly. "Hasn't been occupied in, well, a long time. Not since old Mr. Miller passed on. Folks around here tend to leave that one be." I picked up a loaf of bread, feigning interest in the label. "It's quiet, that's for sure. A bit isolated." "Isolated is one word for it," Eleanor chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "Some would say forsaken. You planning on staying long?" "I hope so," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm a writer, looking for some peace and quiet to work." Eleanor nodded, her eyes still fixed on mine. "Peace and quiet you'll find, I suppose. But the pines, they have their own kind of quiet. A deeper kind. And they don't always appreciate company, especially after dark." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Just that the woods around here, they've got a history. Old stories. Things that go bump in the night and things that don't return from it. The Millers, they always kept to themselves, and they knew to respect the boundaries. You do well to learn that, too." She straightened up, her expression returning to its previous neutral state, but the warning hung in the air like a shroud. I paid for my groceries, feeling an odd mix of apprehension and a strange pull towards the very mystery she was hinting at. As I left Eleanor's Goods, I noticed another man, lean and weathered, standing by the gas pumps across the street. He wasn't doing anything, just watching me, his hands tucked into his pockets. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, but not before I caught a flash of something unreadable in his gaze. Back in the truck, with the engine rumbling to life, I felt a sense of urgency. The town had offered no comfort, only reinforced the ominous feeling that had begun at the edge of the pines. Eleanor's words echoed in my mind. "Things that don't return from it." I drove back towards the cabin, the sun now beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The forest, however, remained a stubborn, unmoving block of shadow. As I pulled into the dirt driveway, a flicker of movement near the tree-line caught my eye. It was indistinct, just a shadow among shadows, but it was enough to make me pause. I grabbed the grocery bags and quickly made my way inside, locking the door behind me. But the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. If anything, it intensified. I put away the groceries, my mind replaying Eleanor's warning. the wary glances of the townspeople, the fleeting shadow by the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something far more complex than just a quiet retreat. My curiosity, once a distant hum, was now a buzzing in my ears demanding answers. Determined to confront the source of my unease, I grabbed a sturdy flashlight and stepped back outside. The last vestiges of twilight were fading, and the pines were already beginning to merge into a single dark mass. I walked towards the edge of my property, where the sprawling, untamed forest began. The air grew colder, the sounds of the distant crickets fading, replaced by the rustle of the wind through the needles. It was a mournful sighing sound, almost like a collective whisper. I swept the beam of my flashlight along the ground, searching for anything out of place. Old branches, dry leaves, patches of moss. Nothing. Just the endless, monotonous carpet of the forest floor. I was about to turn back, dismissing my unease as mere paranoia, when the light caught something unusual. Partially buried beneath a thick layer of pine needles, protruding from the earth like a forgotten marker, was a small, crudely carved wooden figure. It was no bigger than my hand, fashioned from a dark, gnarled piece of wood. Its features were indistinct, almost primitive, but there was no mistaking the two hollowed-out spaces where eyes should be, staring up at me. It wasn't a toy, or a piece of natural debris. It was clearly man-made, and placed there with intent. I knelt, brushing away the needles, my heart thumping. The wood felt cold and ancient beneath my fingertips. It had a strange, almost bitter scent. Who would carve such a thing? And why bury it here, at the very threshold of the whisper of the pines? My initial fear was now overshadowed by a profound sense of foreboding. This wasn't just a place of solitude. It was a place of secrets, and I had just unearthed one of them. The woods weren't just watching me, they were communicating. And this crude, wooden sentinel felt less like a warning, and more like an invocation. The air, which had been crisp and invigorating moments before, suddenly felt thick, heavy with unspoken histories. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden silence of the pines. The sentinel stood before me, a roughly carved wooden figure, perhaps 3 feet tall, rooted deep in the earth. It wasn't intricate, no delicate artistry, but its crudeness was precisely what made it so unsettling. It was primitive, almost primal, like something conjured from the very soil and bark. Its form was vaguely humanoid, a trunk of a tree with 2 shorter branches acting as rudimentary arms, and a rounded top that suggested a head. But there were no features, no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, worn surface that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches from the rough wood, a strange compulsion urging me to touch it, to understand its texture, to decipher its silent message. But a cold prickle of unease stopped me. This wasn't just a piece of wood. It felt charged with an energy I couldn't comprehend, a presence that was both ancient and deeply unsettling. I circled it slowly, my boots crunching softly on the pine needles, my eyes scanning the ground around its base. The earth here felt different, compacted, as if many feet had stood in this very spot over a long stretch of time. There were no discarded offerings, no obvious signs of recent activity, yet the aura of ritual hung heavy in the air. My gaze drifted upward, following the straight, unyielding lines of the pine trees, their branches interlacing like skeletal fingers against the pale sky. Was it just my imagination, or did the woods feel colder here, darker? The whisper of the wind through the needles seemed to carry a different tone now, no longer a soothing lullaby, but a hushed conversation, a chorus of murmurs I couldn't quite grasp. I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone but to take a picture, to document this baffling discovery. But as I raised it, the screen flickered, then went dark. I tried again, pressing the power button, shaking it gently. Nothing. The battery had been full just minutes ago. A chill, colder than the autumn air, snaked down my spine. Coincidence? Or was this place actively resisting documentation, preserving its secrets in the old ways? Frustration warred with a growing sense of dread. I wanted answers, but the woods seemed determined to keep them. I knelt, examining the ground more closely. The soil was rich, dark, and littered with fallen needles, but beneath the surface, I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible disturbance. A pattern. Not footprints, but something else. A series of shallow indentations, arranged in a rough circle around the sentinel. They were old, almost completely reclaimed by the forest floor, but unmistakable once I knew what to look for. They weren't natural. They looked like impressions left by stakes, Or perhaps the heels of many people standing in a specific formation. My mind raced, trying to formulate a rational explanation. A forgotten boundary marker? A surveyor's old stake? But the humanoid form of the sentinel, the palpable sense of ritual, argued against such mundane theories. This felt older, deeper, tied to something far more elemental. I stood up, needing to put some distance between myself and the silent, watchful figure. My cabin, my sanctuary, suddenly felt miles away, its comforting familiarity a distant memory. I turned, intending to retrace my steps, but as I did, my eyes caught on something else. Further into the woods, perhaps 50 yards away, barely visible through the dense undergrowth, was another sentinel. Smaller, less pronounced, but unmistakably similar in form. And beyond that, another. And another. A cold wave washed over me, a realization that solidified the abstract dread into concrete fear. This wasn't an isolated anomaly. This was a pattern, a perimeter, a series of markers leading deeper into the heart of the woods, or perhaps encircling something within it. My earlier thought of an invocation returned, now amplified into a chilling certainty. These weren't just random carvings, they were part of a deliberate design, a silent language spoken by the trees themselves. My initial curiosity morphed into an urgent need for understanding. I had dismissed the local whispers about the whisper of the pines as quaint folklore, the overactive imaginations of a small mountain community. Now those whispers felt less like stories and more like warnings. What had the Ultimer said? Something about the mountain claiming its own, about the woods having eyes. I had laughed it off. I wasn't laughing now. I decided against venturing deeper. My phone was dead, the light was beginning to fade, and an undeniable instinct screamed at me to retreat. I needed to get back to the cabin, to the relative safety of its four walls. But even as I turned, a new thought struck me, a memory surfacing from the dusty corners of my mind. The old maps. When I had bought the cabin from the estate of its previous owner, an eccentric recluse named Silas Blackwood, a box of his personal effects had been included in the sale. Most of it was junk, faded photographs, rusty tools, tattered books on obscure subjects. But there had also been a collection of old, hand-drawn maps of the local area, meticulously detailed, some of them covered in strange symbols and annotations that I had dismissed as Silas's peculiar hobbies. I remembered seeing a few of them tucked away in a drawer in the study, forgotten amidst the renovation chaos. Could Silas have known about these sentinels? Had he drawn them on his maps? Had he been involved in whatever ancient ritual they represented? The very idea sent a shiver through me. Silas Blackwood had been a mystery himself, living in self-imposed exile, rarely interacting with the townsfolk. They said he was a woodsman, a hermit, but always with a hint of something more, something unspoken in their voices. My pace quickened, no longer a leisurely hike, but a determined march back towards the cabin. The whispering pines seemed to follow me, their rustling branches like fingers brushing against my awareness. Every snapped twig, every distant bird call was amplified, sharpened, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. The familiar path, which had once felt like a welcoming embrace, now seemed to twist and turn, each turn potentially revealing another silent, wooden watcher. Reaching the cabin, I practically burst through the door, slamming it shut behind me. The sudden silence inside was almost as jarring as the sounds of the forest. I leaned against the door, catching my breath, the scent of fresh pine and old wood filling my lungs. The cabin, with its half-finished renovations and scattered tools, suddenly felt less like a project and more like a refuge. My first thought was the phone. I plugged it into the charger, hoping it was just a dead battery, but the screen remained stubbornly black. No charging indicator, no flicker of life. It was as if the woods themselves had drained its power, or perhaps subtly interfered with its functionality. This wasn't a simple power drain. It felt like an intentional blackout. I moved to the study, a small dusty room at the back of the cabin that I hadn't yet touched. The air was heavy with the smell of aged paper and forgotten things. I pulled open the drawer where I remembered seeing Silas's maps. Inside, beneath a stack of old magazines, lay a bundle of parchment-like papers, tied with a fraying piece of twine. My hands trembled slightly as I untied the twine. The maps were indeed old, some brittle with age, others more robust, clearly drawn on thicker stock. Most depicted familiar landmarks, the creek, the old logging trails, the outlines of the nearby mountains. But as I spread them out on the dusty desk, My eyes were immediately drawn to one in particular. It was a detailed rendering of the area immediately surrounding my cabin, extending deep into the whisper of the pines. And scattered across it, marked with meticulous care, were small crude symbols, circles with a vertical line through them. Some were clustered, others spread out, but they were undeniably there, forming a distinct pattern. And in the very center of one of these clusters, almost directly where I had found the first sentinel, was a larger, more elaborate symbol, a roughly drawn stick figure with outstretched arms, eerily similar to the wooden carving I had just encountered. Beneath the symbol, scrawled in faded ink, were a few words, almost illegible due to age and Silas's shaky handwriting. I squinted, trying to decipher them. "The Keeper's Path," it read. And then below that, a single chilling phrase that made the blood drain from my face. "They watch, they wait, for the calling." The map wasn't just a record, it was a testament. Silas Blackwood hadn't just stumbled upon these sentinels. He had documented them, named them, and by the ominous tone of his notes, understood their purpose. The Keeper's Path. Keepers of what? And the calling. What calling? The invocation I had felt radiating from that first wooden figure now echoed in my mind, a terrifying premonition. My gaze flickered from the map to the window, where the last vestiges of twilight were painting the sky in bruised purples and grays. The pines outside, once a comforting silhouette, now seemed to loom, their shadows stretching long and distorted, like skeletal sentinels standing guard. I was no longer just renovating a cabin. I had stumbled into a story far older, far darker than I could have imagined. And Silas's map, his cryptic warning, was pulling me deeper into its chilling narrative. The woods weren't just watching, they were actively drawing me in, and I feared what the calling truly meant. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless in the quiet solitude of my cabin. I sat there, Silas's weathered map spread across the rough-hewn table, the flickering lamplight casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with unspoken secrets. The woods, I now understood, weren't just a backdrop to Silas's disappearance. They were an active participant, a living, breathing entity with an agenda I was only just beginning to comprehend. The calling wasn't some abstract metaphor. It was a palpable sensation, an invisible tether tugging at my very core, urging me deeper into the heart of the ancient pines. I tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it away as a trick of my overactive imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the unsettling discoveries I'd made. I told myself it was merely the thrill of the chase, the natural human urge to solve a mystery. But the feeling persisted, a low thrum beneath my skin, a persistent whisper that wasn't sound, but pure, unadulterated instinct. It was the ancestral pull of the wild, amplified by something unnatural, something else. My gaze fell back to the map. Silas had marked specific points with an almost obsessive detail, his shaky hand betraying a mind teetering on the edge. There was the initial trail, the abandoned campsite, the strange symbols etched into rocks near the old logging road. But there was one cluster of markings, deeper than any other, far off the known paths, that now commanded my full attention. It wasn't a familiar landmark. It was a tight knot of crosses, circles, and an indecipherable glyph that looked like a stylized, elongated eye, all clustered around a vaguely sketched feature that resembled a collapsed structure or a natural depression. And next to it, scrawled in faint, almost illegible script, were two words: the Maw. The Maw. The name sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air seeping through the cabin walls. It sounded like something out of a nightmare, a place of consumption and dread. Silas had clearly been terrified of it, yet he had drawn it with a precision that suggested he had seen it, perhaps even been there. The thought chilled me to the bone. What could be so terrifying that it earned such a name, and why would he return to sketch it if it held such horrors? Sleep was an impossibility. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of what I knew. The strange electrical interference, the unsettling quiet of the woods, the bizarre behavior of the wildlife, and now this calling that felt like a direct summons. It all pointed to the Maw as a central nexus, the heart of whatever ancient darkness Silas had uncovered. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in bruised purples and grays, I made a decision. I had to go. The calling had become too insistent to ignore, too powerful to resist. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a primal compulsion. I gathered my gear. A sturdy backpack, my compass, a first aid kit, extra batteries for my flashlight, a satellite phone, and a hunting knife. I also packed a small digital recorder, hoping to capture any unusual sounds or phenomena. I knew the risks. Venturing off-trail in these vast, untamed woods was dangerous enough, but heading towards a place named the Maw, based on a madman's map, felt like an act of pure madness. Yet, I felt a strange sense of clarity, a grim determination. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The early morning light filtered through the dense canopy, creating a dappled, ethereal glow on the forest floor. But despite the beauty, an undercurrent of unease permeated the silence. The usual chorus of waking birds seemed muted, their songs replaced by an unnatural stillness, broken only by the rustle of my own footsteps. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, anticipating my journey. I followed Silas's map, using my compass and GPS to triangulate my position against the landmarks he'd drawn. The initial path was familiar, leading me past the old logging road, then deeper, where the trees grew thicker, older, their branches interwoven like gnarled fingers reaching for a perpetually overcast sky. The ground became uneven, covered in a thick carpet of moss and decaying leaves, making each step a careful calculation. After an hour of relentless trekking, the subtle calling began to intensify. It wasn't a sound but a growing pressure behind my eyes, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath my feet. My skin tingled and the hairs on my arms stood on end, not from cold, but from an unseen electric charge in the air. The pines here were colossal, their trunks scarred with centuries of weather, their tops lost in the perpetual gloom. Sunlight struggled to penetrate, casting the forest in an eternal twilight. I noticed subtle changes. The trees here were different. Many had strange, almost geometric patterns of bark loss, not like lightning strikes or animal damage, but as if something had scraped them with immense force, leaving perfect, unnatural angles. Some of the younger saplings were twisted into impossible shapes, their branches contorted as if in agony, reaching towards the ground rather than the sky. It was disturbing, a silent testament to some unseen force at work. Then I saw it, a clearing entirely devoid of undergrowth, perfectly circular, as if carved out by an invisible hand. In its center stood a single massive pine, far larger than any I had seen, its trunk a dark, almost charcoal black. It was utterly silent in the clearing, a profound, heavy silence that swallowed all sound, even the faint rustle of the wind through the distant canopy. This wasn't the Maw yet, but it felt like an antechamber, a threshold. As I stepped into the clearing, the calling reached a crescendo, a dizzying surge of energy that made my head spin. I felt a fleeting sense of vertigo, as if the ground itself was shifting beneath me. My vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, I noticed something etched into the bark of the giant pine. It was the same elongated glyph I'd seen on Silas's map, carved deep into the ancient wood, crude yet powerful, radiating an unsettling aura. It felt ancient, primal. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was no ordinary forest. This was a place where the veil between worlds felt impossibly thin, a place humming with an energy that defied explanation. I pulled out my digital recorder, pressed record, and spoke into the microphone, my voice a shaky whisper in the oppressive silence. I'm in a clearing, found a giant pine. The symbol is here. The calling is incredibly strong now. It feels like it's pulling me towards something specific, just beyond this point. I consulted Silas's map again. From this clearing marked by the eye symbol, a faint dashed line led further, deeper into what looked like a dense thicket, culminating in the cluster of the Maw symbols. It was close, too close. Pushing through the thicket was a struggle. Thorny bushes tore at my clothes, and unseen branches snagged my backpack. The air grew colder, even though the sun was now higher in the sky, and a strange metallic tang filled my nostrils, like ozone after a lightning strike. The silence here was even more profound, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. Suddenly, the thicket ended, giving way to a sight that stole the air from my lungs. Before me lay a vast, natural depression in the earth, a colossal sinkhole, perhaps 100 feet across and at least 50 feet deep. Its sides were sheer, jagged rock, swallowed by shadow, and at its bottom, something shimmered faintly. But it wasn't the sinkhole itself that truly gripped me with terror. It was what stood at its precipice. There, on the very edge of the abyss, stood a series of crudely constructed wooden totems, each one adorned with feathers, animal bones, and strips of dried leather. They were old, weathered, clearly not the work of any modern hiker or park ranger. They looked tribal, ancient, like something from a forgotten past. And between them, strung like a warning, were garlands of dried pine cones and small dark stones, each one strangely smooth and uniform. My gaze was drawn inexorably to the center of the sinkhole. The shimmering I'd seen was more pronounced now. It wasn't water. It was a faint, pulsating light, a deep, unnatural violet hue, emanating from a cluster of what looked like dark, crystalline structures at the very bottom. The calling here was overwhelming, a resonant frequency that vibrated through my bones, urging me forward, closer to the edge, closer to that unholy glow. This was it. This was the Maw. And as I stood there, frozen by a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold and cemented the chilling reality of Silas's fate. Partially buried beneath one of the totems, half concealed by a tangle of roots, was a small leather-bound journal. It was old, its cover cracked and faded, but distinctive. It was the same journal Silas had been seen carrying, the one his sister, Emily, had described. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the calling now a deafening roar in my mind. The journal was heavy, surprisingly intact, and as I carefully pulled it free, a page fluttered open, revealing a hurried, frantic scrawl. The words, though faded, were stark and terrifying. It sees me. It knows my thoughts. The whispers. They're not from the trees. They're from it. My breath hitched. The calling wasn't just a pull. It was a voice, a consciousness reaching out. And Silas had heard it too. The Maw wasn't just a place. It was something alive, something that could see and know and whisper. And it was speaking to me now. The whisper wasn't a sound heard by my ears, but a thought impressed directly onto the very core of my being. It was ancient, vast, and achingly lonely, yet simultaneously filled with a profound, almost predatory hunger. It spoke of deep roots and forgotten things, of the turning of seasons and the slow, inevitable creep of time. It promised understanding, a release from the mundane, a connection to something truly profound. If only I would listen, if only I would come closer. I stumbled back from the edge of the clearing, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the impossible. A place, a geological anomaly, was speaking to me. It wasn't just my imagination. The certainty of it was absolute, chilling me to the bone. I looked at Silas, his weathered face etched with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. A mixture of fear, resignation, and perhaps a strange kind of peace. "You heard it, didn't you?" I managed, my voice a ragged whisper. Silas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the dark opening. "Always have. Since I was a boy. Not like this, though. Not so clear. It's getting stronger, Michael. Much stronger." The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Silas had known. All these years he'd lived with this impossible secret, this sentient entity lurking beneath the earth. "What is it, Silas? What does it want?" He turned to me then, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow I hadn't seen before. "It wants connection. It wants to be known. And it wants to take. Always takes. Remember the stories? The old ones about the forest claiming its own? They weren't just stories, Michael. The Maw. It's the heart of it all. It calls, and eventually some answer." My mind raced back to the disappearances, the unrecovered bodies, the quiet acceptance of the town. It wasn't just a dangerous wilderness. It was a predator, a living, breathing thing that lured people to their doom. And now it was calling me. "Why me, Silas?" I asked, a desperate plea in my voice. He shrugged, a heavy, weary motion. "Some are more attuned, I suppose, more open to its song. You feel it, don't you? That pull? It's not just curiosity. It's an invitation. A binding." The word binding sent a shiver down my spine. It implied something inescapable, a pact I hadn't agreed to. The whisper in my mind intensified, a low thrumming that resonated with every heartbeat. It wasn't just speaking. It was singing, a wordless melody that promised solace and oblivion in equal measure. I spent the next few days in a haze, the whisper a constant companion. It wasn't intrusive, not exactly. More like a deep, resonate hum beneath the surface of my thoughts, occasionally breaking through with a poignant image or a fleeting, tantalizing sensation. It showed me glimpses of the forest through its eyes, the slow growth of ancient trees, the delicate dance of sunlight and shadow, the quiet decay that fueled new life. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. I tried to act normal, to go about my days, but the maw's presence was overwhelming. Emily noticed. "You've been quiet, Michael," she said one evening, her brow furrowed with concern. "And you look tired. Are you sleeping okay?" I forced a smile, a hollow mask. "Just a lot on my mind. Work, you know." She didn't press, but her eyes lingered on me, a worried glint in their depths. I realized then the dangerous isolation this secret was creating. How could I tell her? How could I explain that a hole in the ground was whispering secrets to me? She'd think I was losing my mind, or worse, that I was just another one of the town's oddities, destined to succumb to the forest's strange influence. David, ever the pragmatist, was oblivious. He was too busy planning his next big real estate venture, talking about expanding the lodge, bringing in more tourists. "This town's got potential, Michael," he'd say, oblivious to the ancient, hungry heart beating beneath his feet. "Just needs a little modernization, a touch of the outside world." The irony was bitter. The outside world was exactly what the maw seemed to disdain, what it slowly, meticulously consumed. I knew I couldn't ignore it. The whisper was becoming more insistent, weaving itself into my dreams, painting vivid, unsettling landscapes of impossible depths and glowing moss. I needed answers not just from Silas but from history, from the very fabric of this strange place. I started spending hours at the town's small, dusty library. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, a woman whose spectacles were perpetually perched on her nose, gave me curious glances as I delved into local history archives. I pored over old newspapers, town council minutes, and even tattered personal journals donated by long-gone residents. Most of it was mundane. Crop yields, local elections, the occasional barn raising. But then I found a recurring theme, subtle at first, then increasingly overt. Reports of lost souls in the forest, dating back to the late 1700s. Descriptions of a deepening shadow in the woods. One particularly chilling entry from a diary dated 1887 spoke of the humming rock that calls the lost home. The humming rock. It had to be the maw. The diary belonged to a woman named Clara Jensen. Her entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with poetic, yet disturbing descriptions of the forest's allure. "It sings to me," she wrote, her handwriting growing shaky. "It shows me beauty beyond mortal sight. It promises peace, a true belonging, if I only step into its embrace." Her last entry was a single, defiant line. "Tomorrow I answer." Clara Jensen was one of the many who had simply vanished into the whisperwind pines. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Clara's words echoed the whisper I now carried within me. The maw wasn't just a passive lure. It was an active manipulator, preying on people's deepest desires and vulnerabilities. What did it promise Clara? What did it promise me? The whisper, in response to my research, began to shift. It wasn't just ancient longing anymore. It was knowledge. It started to show me things, fragmented memories that weren't my own. Glimpses of Clara walking towards the maw, her face serene, almost ecstatic. Images of other lost souls, their expressions a mix of fear and strange rapture as they neared the dark opening. It was like the maw was sharing its memories, its conquests with me. It was showing me what awaited me. One afternoon, returning from the library, the air around me grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and something else. Something metallic and earthy, like old blood and damp soil. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches forming skeletal fingers against the overcast sky. The whisper wasn't a hum anymore. It was a distinct low thrumming vibrating through my bones. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. I found Silas chopping firewood by his cabin, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up as I approached, his eyes immediately meeting mine, a knowing sadness in them. "It's getting harder to ignore, isn't it?" he said without preamble. "It's showing me things, Silas," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Memories. Of the others. Clara Jensen. It's like it wants me to see what happened to them." Silas sighed, resting his axe against a stump. "It does. It wants you to understand, to accept. It weaves a powerful illusion, Michael. It makes you believe you're finding answers, when all you're doing is walking deeper into its web." "But what is it?" I pleaded. "An entity? A creature? A god?" He shook his head. "I don't know, son. The old legends speak of a heart of the forest, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, a place that consumes to grow. It's not evil, not in the way we understand it, just is. And it's hungry. The whisper in my mind flared, an image flashing before my inner eye. A vast, subterranean cavern, dripping with phosphorescent growth, echoing with an ancient rhythmic pulse. And at its heart, something immense, formless, radiating a cold, profound energy. It wasn't just a void. It was a presence, a consciousness so alien, so utterly beyond human comprehension, that merely perceiving it threatened to unravel my sanity. Silas seemed to sense my internal struggle. "It's trying to show you its truth, Michael," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Trying to draw you in. Don't let it. Don't believe its promises. There's no peace there, only absorption." But the image of that cavern, that pulsing heart, had taken root. The whisper now carried a new urgency, a desperate plea mixed with an undeniable allure. It promised not just understanding, but a part in something grander, something eternal. It offered to fill the void I hadn't even realized existed within me, a sense of belonging I had always unconsciously craved since leaving my old life behind. It knew my vulnerabilities, my deepest unspoken longings. It was a perfect, insidious predator. I looked back towards the dark line of the pines, towards the maw. It wasn't just calling me, it was inviting me. It was showing me its secrets, preparing me. And the terrifying truth was, a part of me, a deep primal part that the whisper had awakened, wanted to know what lay within. It wanted to answer the call. The forest was no longer just a backdrop to my life. It was a living, breathing entity, and I was caught in its inescapable grasp. The whisper was no longer just a suggestion. It was a command, a direct path laid out before me, and I felt an overwhelming, terrifying compulsion to follow it. The whisper's command was absolute, a silent force that seized control of my will. It wasn't a choice, it was an inevitability. My legs, though heavy with dread, moved with an eerie autonomy, carrying me away from the deceptive safety of my cabin and deeper into the encroaching twilight of the forest. The air grew colder, biting at my exposed skin, but I barely registered it. All my senses were tuned to the invisible pull, the magnetic north of an unknown terror. The pines, once a source of comfort, now seemed to lean in, their shadowy forms morphing into gaunt, watchful sentinels. Their branches, skeletal against the fading sky, writhed as if in silent agony, or perhaps silent anticipation. The ground beneath my feet was a treacherous carpet of needles and damp earth, yet I moved with an unnatural certainty, never stumbling, never hesitating. It was as if the path itself was being woven into existence just for me, each fallen branch and moss-covered stone a deliberate marker on a journey I was powerless to refuse. The whisper intensified, not in volume but in its clarity, its insidious tendrils coiling around my mind, stripping away my resistance, replacing it with a chilling, almost reverent obedience. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a sensation, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones, charting a course through the labyrinthine woods. I felt like a puppet, my strings manipulated by an unseen, ancient hand, dancing to a tune only I could hear. Minutes bled into hours, or perhaps it was mere moments, time blurring into an indistinguishable haze. The world narrowed to the rhythmic crunch of my boots, the chilling breath of the wind through the needles, and the relentless guiding pulse of the whisper. Moonlight, fractured and spectral, began to filter through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in shifting patterns of silver and obsidian. The shadows deepened, coalescing into monstrous shapes that seemed to follow my every move, their forms shifting just at the periphery of my vision. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to shake the spectral illusions, but they persisted, a constant, unsettling presence. Then the whisper changed. It wasn't a pull anymore, but a sudden, sharp cessation of the pull, as if I had reached my destination. My feet halted abruptly, my body rigid, a sudden stillness descending upon me that was more terrifying than the journey itself. I stood in a small circular clearing, unlike any I had seen before. The pines here were ancient, their trunks thicker, their branches gnarled and twisted into grotesque, almost sentient shapes. They formed a perfect, unbroken ring, their towering forms creating an almost impenetrable dome against the night sky, save for a single narrow aperture directly above, through which a single brilliant star seemed to peer down like a watchful eye. In the very center of this eerie amphitheater stood something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a tree, nor a natural rock formation. It was a monolith, a slab of dark, unyielding stone, roughly 10 feet tall and 5 feet wide, partially swallowed by moss and lichen, yet undeniably man-made, or at least shaped by something with intent. It hummed with an almost imperceptible energy, a silent vibration that echoed the whisper in my skull. As I took a hesitant step closer, my eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, traced the surface of the ancient stone. It was covered in carvings, almost entirely obscured by centuries of overgrowth, but distinct enough to discern. Not words, not pictograms of animals or people, but symbols. One symbol, in particular, dominated the face of the monolith, repeating itself in various sizes and orientations. It was a complex spiral, not a simple coil, but one that seemed to fold back in on itself, an infinite looping knot that defied easy interpretation. Within the spiral, faint lines crisscrossed, forming what looked like stylized skeletal branches or perhaps roots. My fingers, trembling, reached out to touch the cold, rough stone. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure, raw information surged through me. It was overwhelming, a torrent of images and feelings that flooded my mind in an instant. I saw glimpses of figures, dark and indistinct, moving around the monolith in ancient times, chanting, their faces obscured by shadows and the passage of untold years. I felt a profound sense of reverence, mixed with an equally profound terror, emanating from the very stone itself. And then the whisper. It wasn't just a sense of knowing anymore. It was close, so incredibly close, it felt as if it originated from within my own chest, vibrating through my ribs. It coalesced into something almost like a voice, not spoken words, but a direct, unfiltered thought implanted into my consciousness. They offered. The thought was incomplete, fragmented, yet chillingly clear. They offered. Who offered? What did they offer? The whisper pulsed, a silent answer that sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread that settled deep in my stomach. The figures I had glimpsed in my mind's eye, the missing people, Jessica, David, Emily, they were not just lost, they were taken. And this monolith, this ancient silent sentinel, was connected to it all. The symbol, the intricate spiral with its skeletal branches, suddenly took on a new horrifying meaning. It wasn't just a design. It was a representation of something that consumed, something that drew life inward, feeding on it. The roots, I now understood, were not just roots reaching into the earth. They were tendrils grasping, pulling, drawing everything into the center of the spiral. The center was not a void. It was a hungry maw. A new wave of insight, more terrifying than any before, washed over me. The pines themselves. They weren't just trees. They were an extension, a manifestation of this ancient, consuming entity. The whisper wasn't coming from the pines. The pines were the whisper, a collective, living consciousness that had been dormant, or perhaps merely patient, for centuries. And now it was awake. I stumbled back from the monolith, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, each beat echoing the whisper's chilling revelation. The air in the clearing grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, to coalesce, no longer mere illusions but tangible forms pressing in from all sides. I could feel eyes on me, countless eyes, not just from the ancient pines encircling the clearing, but from something deeper, something far older, stirring beneath the very earth. A low guttural hum began to rise from the ground, vibrating through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my very core. It was the sound of something awakening, something vast and ancient, stretching its limbs after a long slumber. The whisper, now a roaring silence in my head, screamed a single terrifying word, a name whispered by generations long forgotten, a name that resonated with primal fear. Malachor. My breath hitched in my throat. Malachor. It wasn't a place or a thing, it was a name. The name of the entity. The name of the whispered evil. And I, Michael, stood alone in its ancient sanctuary, having just called its attention. The trees around the clearing began to sway, not with the wind, but with an internal rhythmic pulse, their branches creaking like ancient bones. The single star above, the watchful eye, seemed to dim, swallowed by an encroaching darkness that had nothing to do with the night sky. The hum intensified, a deep, resonant thrum that filled the entire clearing, vibrating through my very soul, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that I was no longer an observer. I was now a part of the offering. The whisper had led me here, not to understand, but to be claimed. And as the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, I realized my journey was far from over. It had only just truly begun. The earth beneath me bucked with a primeval force, a guttural groan ripping through the ancient soil that resonated deep within my chest. It wasn't just a tremor. It was a violent convulsion, as if the very ground was tearing itself apart. I stumbled, my arms flailing wildly, the dense canopy of pines above blurring into a frantic swirl of green and brown. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, a metallic tang like distant lightning, or perhaps the scent of fear itself. Panic clawed at my throat, but it was a cold, detached panic, almost an observer's dread. This wasn't an earthquake, it was too localized, too deliberate. This was the earth responding, unfolding, perhaps even opening. The whisper, which had been a gentle invitation, now swelled into a deafening roar in my mind, a symphony of ancient voices rising from the depths. It wasn't speaking words, but pure, unadulterated intent. It wanted me, and it was taking me. A sickening crack echoed, not from the ground, but from the very air, vibrating through my bones. I looked down, my breath hitching as a jagged fissure, thin as a spiderweb at first, snaked rapidly across the forest floor directly in front of me. It widened with horrifying speed, tearing through roots and rocks, exhaling a plume of dust and a breath of air that was stale, cold, and utterly alien. The crack became a chasm, a gaping maw that swallowed the light, revealing nothing but an impenetrable darkness below. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping on loose earth, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But the ground continued to heave, tilting violently, pushing me inexorably towards the abyss. I dug my heels in, desperate to resist, but it was like fighting against a tidal wave. The pines around me groaned, their mighty trunks swaying precariously, shedding needles like tears. One ancient pine, its roots exposed by the widening rift, let out a final mournful creak before toppling into the darkness with a sound that was swallowed instantly, leaving an echoing silence that was more terrifying than any crash. I was losing my footing, the edge of the chasm now just inches from my toes. I could feel the cold, dank air rising from its depths, a suffocating breath from another world. The whisper intensified, a triumphant, sibilant hiss that seemed to emanate not from my mind, but from the very maw itself, pulling me closer. It was a siren song, promising answers, promising an end, promising a beginning. And then I fell. It wasn't a long fall, not a plunge into an endless void. It was more of a controlled descent, a slide down a steep earthen slope that had suddenly given way beneath me. I tumbled, dirt and loose stones raining down around me, my hands scraping against rough, moss-covered surfaces. The darkness was absolute, pressing in from all sides, and the air grew colder, heavier, tasting of mineral and decay. I landed with a jarring thud on something surprisingly solid, knocking the wind from my lungs. For a moment I lay there, disoriented, dust motes dancing in the faint light that trickled down from the fissure above, now a distant slit of gray against the inky blackness. My head spun and a dull ache settled in my hip, but nothing felt broken. I was alive, but where was I? Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself up, my hands exploring the ground around me. It wasn't soft earth or jagged rocks. It was unnervingly smooth, cold, and strangely uniform. My fingers traced intricate patterns, carvings that felt ancient and deliberate. It was stone, but not natural bedrock. This was man-made, or something else made. A faint phosphorescent glow shimmered into existence somewhere in the oppressive blackness ahead. A soft, ethereal light that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a distant heart. It was just enough to banish the absolute darkness, revealing the contours of my immediate surroundings. I was in a tunnel, not a natural cave, but a perfectly circular passage, carved with an impossible precision. The walls were smooth, glistening with moisture, adorned with those same intricate carvings I had felt, spirals and interlocking geometric shapes that seemed to hum with a latent energy. The air was still, silent, save for the faint drip of water somewhere in the distance. The whisper, though still present, had softened, becoming a background hum, a constant companion rather than a forceful command. As my eyes adjusted to the dim, otherworldly glow, I saw that the tunnel sloped gently downwards, leading into the heart of the earth. The light pulsed, guiding me, beckoning me. There was no going back. The fissure above was too high, too narrow now, a mere memory. My journey truly had just begun. I took a deep breath, the air surprisingly breathable, though it carried a faint metallic tang. With a renewed sense of grim determination, I started walking, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, as if I were descending into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The carvings on the walls seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, their patterns twisting, almost alive. I couldn't decipher them, but they radiated a sense of profound age, of knowledge beyond human comprehension. The tunnel continued for what felt like an eternity, the gentle slope taking me deeper and deeper. The phosphorescent glow intensified slightly as I progressed, revealing more details. I noticed small alcoves carved into the walls at regular intervals, each one containing a single peculiar object. They weren't statues or idols, but strange crystalline formations, some glowing faintly with the same inner light as the tunnel itself, others dark and inert. They looked like petrified tears or perhaps dormant eggs. My hand brushed against one of these crystals as I passed, and a jolt, not of electricity, but of pure raw energy, shot up my arm. Images flashed in my mind. A swirling vortex of green and gold, the faint outline of a towering structure, and then the distinct sound of the whisper, clearer than ever, not a jumble of voices, but a singular, resonant tone. It was a language, I realized, but not one meant for human ears. It was a frequency of vibration. I pulled my hand back sharply, my heart racing. These weren't just decorations. They were conduits, memory banks, perhaps even communication devices. They were alive in some alien way. Further down the tunnel, the air grew warmer, almost humid, and a new sound began to emerge, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. A low, rhythmic thrumming like a colossal engine buried deep within the earth. It was a sound that vibrated through the stone, through my very bones, a powerful magnetic hum that drew me forward despite the growing unease. The tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The phosphorescent glow was much brighter here, emanating from immense crystalline structures that shot up from the floor like massive, otherworldly stalagmites, reaching towards an unseen ceiling lost in shadow. The thrumming was deafening now, a constant, resonant roar that made the air itself tremble. And in the center of this colossal chamber, suspended above a swirling pool of luminous greenish liquid, was the source of the hum. It was a colossal, intricate mechanism, a symphony of interlocking gears and rotating rings, all crafted from the same smooth, dark stone as the tunnel walls, but embedded with countless glowing crystals. It pulsed with an immense power, radiating heat and light, casting long dancing shadows across the cavern. This was it. This was the heart of the whisper. This was what the pines had been guarding, what the missing people had been drawn to, what the offering truly meant. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was an ancient, alien technology, buried for millennia. As I stepped further into the chamber, my eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror, I saw them. Scattered around the edges of the luminous pool, near the base of the colossal machine, were figures. Dozens of them. They weren't bodies, not exactly. They were desiccated, mummified husks sitting upright, their faces frozen in expressions of serene rapture or agonizing despair. Their clothes, what little remained, were tattered and ancient, yet some still bore the unmistakable signs of modern attire. These were the missing. The hikers, the campers, the curious souls drawn in by the whisper. They hadn't been killed in a ritual. They had been absorbed, drained, transformed. They were like batteries or perhaps witnesses, their life force, their consciousness somehow feeding or interacting with this monstrous machine. Their eyes, hollowed and dark, seemed to stare at the pulsating core, forever fixed on whatever cosmic truth or horror they had witnessed in their final moments. A wave of nausea washed over me, a gut-wrenching realization of the true nature of the whisper. It wasn't just a sound, it was a lure, a harvester. And I was the latest harvest. The thrumming intensified, and the colossal machine in the center of the chamber began to spin faster, its crystalline components glowing with a blinding intensity. The green liquid in the pool below it churned, bubbles rising to the surface, releasing a sweet, intoxicating vapor that filled the air. It was the same scent I had noticed in the forest, the one that had drawn me deeper, bypassing my fear. I felt a strange pull, an irresistible urge to approach the machine, to immerse myself in the glowing pool. My legs moved on their own, a puppet on strings, my will overridden by the powerful, intoxicating hum. The whisper, now a chorus of countless voices, sang a song of surrender, of ultimate understanding, of becoming one with something vast and eternal. I fought it, tried to dig my heels in, but my body was no longer my own. My arms lifted, my gaze fixed on the mesmerizing dance of light and shadow, the swirling green beneath the machine. I was being drawn in just like all the others. As I neared the edge of the pool, I saw something else, something I hadn't noticed in my initial shock. Propped against one of the massive crystalline stalagmites, partially obscured by shadow, was a backpack. A familiar backpack. It was Michael's. My brothers. A cold dread, sharper than any fear I had felt before, pierced through the hypnotic haze. Michael had been here. He hadn't just gone missing. He had found this place, and he had become one of them. Then my eyes fell on something else, clutched in the skeletal hand of one of the mummified figures closest to Michael's backpack. It was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and weathered, but I recognized it instantly. It was my grandfather's journal, the one I had read so many times, the one that had started this entire journey. A jolt of pure horror, followed by a surge of defiant rage, ripped through me. This wasn't just about discovery anymore. This was personal. This was my family. The whisper had claimed them, and now it sought to claim me. With a strength born of desperation, I fought against the invisible pull, my muscles screaming in protest. The intoxicating vapor was thick, making my head swim, but the image of Michael and my grandfather, reduced to these withered husks, fueled a fierce resistance. This wasn't understanding. This was annihilation. Just as the edge of the luminous pool touched my boots, and the powerful hum threatened to overwhelm my very consciousness, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows far across the chamber. A shadow detached itself from the wall, a figure tall and gaunt, moving with an eerie swiftness. It wasn't one of the mummified remains. This figure was alive, and it was watching me. Its eyes, two pinpricks of glowing amber, seemed to burn through the gloom, fixing on me with an intensity that promised both ancient wisdom and unimaginable malice. I was not alone in this chamber, and whatever this entity was, it was undeniably a part of the whisper, perhaps even its master. My struggle for survival had just taken a terrifying new turn. My struggle for survival had just taken a terrifying new turn. The air in the chamber, already thick with the scent of damp earth and something acridly metallic, now pulsed with an invisible energy. It wasn't a physical presence I saw, not a creature of flesh and bone, but a distortion in the very fabric of the space. The shadows deepened and swirled, coalescing into a formless, towering silhouette that seemed to absorb all light, yet cast no discernible shadow of its own. It was a gaping maw of nothingness, and from its depths the whisper intensified, no longer a distant murmur but a direct assault on my mind. It wasn't a single voice but a chorus. Thousands of voices, overlapping, intertwining, each one a thread of agony, longing, and ancient, forgotten memories. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet their meaning was chillingly clear. Asterisk, you are here. You have come to us. You are ours. Asterisk, the words weren't heard by my ears but echoed directly in the cavern of my skull, a violation of my very consciousness. My knees buckled, and I fought to remain upright, my hands instinctively flying to my temples as if to ward off the psychic onslaught. This was the master of the whisper, an entity of pure malevolence and ancient power. It had drawn me here, lured me deeper into the heart of the forest's darkness, not to simply observe but to consume. A wave of profound despair washed over me, a feeling so potent it threatened to crush my will entirely. It was the collective anguish of every soul that had ever succumbed to the whisper, funneled through this monstrous core. I saw flashes in my mind's eye, images of explorers lost in the pines, their faces etched with horror, ancient tribesmen, their rituals failing to appease the hungry entity, even glimpses of modern-day hikers, their screams silenced by the encroaching shadows. Each vision was a fragment of the entity's memory, a testament to its long and brutal reign. The entity's presence grew, pressing down on me, urging me to surrender. It wanted me to join the chorus, to become another voice in its eternal symphony of suffering. But as the despair threatened to overwhelm me, a flicker of defiance ignited deep within. I had come too far, endured too much to simply give in. I thought of Jessica, of the life we had built, of the promise I had made to find answers. That spark of love and determination became a shield against the entity's psychic assault, a tiny ember in the suffocating darkness. "What do you want?" I gasped, the words feeling futile against the roar in my head. My voice was hoarse, barely audible even to myself. The chorus of whispers intensified, a cacophony of ancient tongues and modern pleas. Asterisk, we want what is ours. We want to be complete. We want to be free. Asterisk, the words were disjointed, yet their intent was terrifyingly coherent. It wanted to expand, to break free from this subterranean prison, to consume the world beyond the pines. It had been trapped here for eons, feeding on the fear and life force of those who ventured too close, slowly gathering strength, waiting for the right moment to unleash itself. And then, a new element emerged from the swirling shadows. Not another entity but a person. She was slumped against a jagged rock formation, partially obscured by the shifting darkness, her form gaunt and ethereal, as if she were a ghost herself. Her hair, once probably a vibrant blonde, was now dull and matted, streaked with gray. Her clothes were tattered remnants of what might have been hiking gear, faded and stained with grime. Her eyes, though wide open, held a vacant, faraway look, but as the entity's presence intensified, a flicker of awareness of terror sparked within them. It was Sarah. I recognized her from the missing person posters, the young woman who had vanished from the very same trail I had stumbled upon weeks ago. She was alive, or at least her body was, but her spirit, her essence, seemed to be barely clinging to existence, tethered to this abyssal chamber by some unseen malevolent force. She was one of the not alone presences. She was a victim, a prisoner, a living testament to the entity's power. The entity shifted, its formless mass seemed to ripple, and a tendril of shadow detached itself, snaking towards Sarah. As it touched her, a faint, almost inaudible whimper escaped her lips. Her body twitched, a puppet on invisible strings, and her head slowly turned towards me. Her lips parted, and a voice, thin and reedy, distinct from the chorus of whispers, yet undeniably intertwined with it, spoke. "Run!" she rasped, her voice barely a whisper itself, laced with an unimaginable torment. He wants your light, your hope. It feeds him." Her words were a jolt, a desperate warning from someone who had witnessed the entity's true nature firsthand. The entity seemed to react to her defiance, the shadows around Sarah darkening, pressing in on her. Her eyes widened in terror, and she began to convulse, a silent scream tearing at her throat. It was as if the entity was punishing her for daring to communicate with me, for trying to break its hold. "What has it done to you?" I demanded, my heart aching with a mix of fear and profound pity. I took a hesitant step towards her, my hand instinctively reaching out, even though I knew it was likely futile. The entity's presence flared, a wave of cold fury radiating from its core. The chorus of whispers swelled, becoming a guttural roar that vibrated through my bones. Asterisk, she is ours. They are all ours. Soon you will be too. Asterisk, the message was clear. Sarah was merely a vessel, a tool. And I was next. A fresh barrage of visions assaulted my mind. This time they were not ancient memories but possible futures. I saw myself gaunt and broken, my eyes vacant like Sarah's, my voice joining the endless chorus. I saw Jessica, frantic with worry, searching for me, ultimately succumbing to despair, her own light slowly fading. The entity was not just a devourer of life, but a destroyer of hope, a weaver of misery that stretched beyond its immediate victims. It sought to unravel the very fabric of human connection, to twist love into agony. I staggered back, the sheer psychological weight threatening to crush me. This wasn't a fight I could win with strength or cunning alone. This was a battle for my mind, my soul, my very identity. The chamber glowed faintly with an eerie phosphorescent light emanating from veins of mineral in the rock, casting long dancing shadows that seemed to mock my futile struggle. The air grew colder, and I could feel my breath hitching in my throat, my lungs burning. Sarah, still convulsing, managed to lock eyes with me again. This time there was a desperate plea in their depths, a silent message that transcended the entity's control. It was a plea for deliverance, not just for herself, but for me, for anyone who might stumble into this cursed place. The tendril of shadow that had been tormenting Sarah now began to retract, gathering itself back into the main mass of the entity. But as it did, it pulled a shimmering, almost invisible thread from Sarah's chest. It was her light, her hope, the very essence the entity craved. As the thread snapped, Sarah's body slumped further, her eyes losing their final spark of awareness, becoming truly vacant. She was still breathing, but whatever had made her her was gone, absorbed into the entity, becoming another voice in its horrifying symphony. The entity pulsed with renewed power, growing subtly larger, its shadowy mass more defined, more menacing. It had just fed, and now its hungry gaze, though unseen, was fixed solely on me. It had shown me Sarah's fate, a grim promise of what awaited me if I didn't comply, if I didn't surrender my own light. I was trapped, not just in a physical chamber, but in a psychological arena, facing a foe that fed on the very things that made me human. My only weapon was my will, my only shield, the memory of those I loved. But how long could a single spark of defiance last against an ancient, cosmic horror that had devoured countless souls. The air crackled with anticipation, and the whispers, now a focused singular demand in my mind, urged me to give up, to let go, to join the chorus. The entity was ready to claim its next victim, and I knew with a chilling certainty that it would not be easily denied. The world spun, a dizzying vortex of green and brown, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling my nostrils, heavy and cloying. My legs felt like lead, my arms like dead weights. I was falling, not physically but spiritually, emotionally, my consciousness slipping away, drawn into the overwhelming current of the whispers. They promised peace, an end to the ceaseless searching, a reunion with Emily, with Sarah, with all the lost souls who had found their final resting place within the embrace of these ancient trees. The temptation was immense, a warm, beckoning darkness that promised oblivion from the terror and the unanswered questions. My body sagged, my knees threatening to buckle, my eyes fluttering shut. And then a flicker. Not a memory, not a sound, but a feeling. A sharp burning sensation deep within my chest. A tiny spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. It was Emily's laughter, echoing not in my ears, but in my soul. A sound I hadn't truly heard in years but knew intimately. It was the image of her face, not pale and spectral as the entity presented her, but vibrant, full of life, teasing me about some childhood prank. It was the promise I had made to find her, to understand, to bring her home, even if home was just an answer. That spark ignited, fanning into a small flame. The whispers, though still powerful, no longer felt like an irresistible torrent but a smothering blanket I could, perhaps, push away. My eyes snapped open wide and wild, scanning the distorted forest around me. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers, the shadows beneath them deepening into impenetrable voids. But I saw something else, something I hadn't noticed before, something that cut through the haze of the entity's influence. Buried amidst the thick undergrowth, half covered by fallen leaves and moss, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It was a robin, painted in faded reds and browns, its tiny beak chipped. My breath hitched. This wasn't just any bird. This was the bird Emily had carved for me when we were kids. A clumsy but heartfelt gift after I'd found a nest of baby robins that had fallen during a storm. I had lost it years ago, convinced it had been left behind when we moved from our old house. But here it was, deep in the whispering pines, miles from any trail. The sight of it was a jolt, a cold splash of reality. This wasn't just a place of loss and despair. This was a place where Emily had been. This was a tangible link. The whispers intensified, trying to pull me back, to dismiss the bird as a hallucination, a trick of the exhausted mind. But I knew better. I felt the familiar smooth grain of the wood under my trembling fingers as I reached down, pulling it free from the damp earth. It was real. Emily was real. And she was more than just a ghost story or a lost memory. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the forest, not from a branch breaking, but from something heavier, closer. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't place. Ozone and something sweet, like decaying flowers. The whispers solidified, no longer just voices in my head, but a tangible presence all around me, vibrating through the ground, through the very air. I spun around, clutching the wooden bird, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing at the edge of the clearing, where the ancient pines formed an almost impenetrable wall, was a figure. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was a distortion, a swirling mass of shadow and light, constantly shifting like smoke caught in a breeze. But within its chaotic form, I could discern outlines, suggestions of limbs, a head, a torso. And its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were twin points of incandescent red light that burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. They were fixed on me, on the wooden bird in my hand. The whispers, now emanating directly from this terrifying manifestation, were no longer just lulling. They were a roar, a furious, frustrated demand. "Give it back," they hissed, 1,000 voices woven into one, scraping against my sanity. "She belongs to us. You belong to us." My blood ran cold, but the small wooden bird in my hand felt surprisingly warm, a tiny ember of defiance. This was it, the whisperer, the entity that had haunted this forest for generations, that had claimed Emily and Sarah and countless others. It was real, and it was standing right in front of me. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to paralyze me. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to drop the bird, to surrender. But the image of Emily's face, the vibrant, living face, flashed in my mind once more. I wouldn't leave her. Not again. No, I choked out, my voice ragged. Barely a whisper against the entity's sonic assault. She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to me. She belongs to our family. The shadow figure recoiled slightly, a ripple passing through its form, as if my words were a physical blow. The red eyes narrowed, burning brighter. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, the very air crackling with an unseen energy. The whispers, momentarily stunned, surged back with renewed fury, a cacophony of pleas and threats, promises of eternal torment if I resisted, of endless peace if I yielded. I took a shaky step backward, my eyes never leaving the entity. It was vast, imposing, its presence sucking the warmth and life from the surrounding area. The chill that had been a constant companion in the woods now intensified, seeping into my bones, a cold that felt deeper than any winter frost. I realized with a sickening lurch that it wasn't just trying to claim my soul. It was trying to devour my very existence, to erase my memories, to make me part of its endless silent chorus. But the wooden bird in my hand was my anchor. It was a tangible piece of Emily, a sign that she had been here, that she had fought, that she had left a part of herself behind. It was a defiance against the entity's attempt to erase her entirely. You took her, I accused, my voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of righteous anger. You took Sarah. You took all of them. What do you want? Why? The shadow figure shimmered, its form briefly coalescing into something more defined, something that almost resembled a human shape, tall and gaunt, before dissolving back into chaos. The red eyes pulsed. The whispers became a focused, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. Peace, it hissed. Belonging. We offer peace. We offer belonging. Join us. End the suffering. This isn't peace, I countered, desperation lacing my words. This is oblivion. This is taking. You don't offer anything. You steal. A low, mournful sound like wind howling through 1,000 empty caverns emanated from the entity. It began to move slowly at first, then with increasing speed, gliding across the forest floor towards me. The trees around it seemed to wither, their leaves curling and browning instantly. The air grew impossibly cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. I could feel its tendrils, unseen but palpable, reaching out, probing my mind, searching for weakness, for a crack in my resolve. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I felt a surge of adrenaline, not to flee but to fight, to protect this small, fragile piece of my sister. My gaze swept frantically around the clearing, searching for anything, any weapon, any escape. There was nothing but the dense, unforgiving forest, the ancient pines standing as silent sentinels to generations of horror. But then my eyes landed on something else, half hidden beneath a cluster of ferns near the base of a particularly gnarled pine. It was a small, ornate silver locket. It looked old, tarnished, but undeniably familiar. My heart leaped into my throat. It was the locket Sarah always wore, a gift from her grandmother. Emily had often teased her about it, saying it was too fancy for hiking in the woods. 2 pieces, 2 tangible links to the missing girls, 2 anchors against the overwhelming power of the Whisperer. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a trail left behind, perhaps intentionally, perhaps by accident, but a trail nonetheless. The entity was closer now, its form towering over me, the red eyes blazing with an unholy light. The whispers were deafening, a relentless assault on my senses, threatening to shatter my sanity. I could feel its cold touch, a creeping numbness starting in my extremities. With a desperate surge of strength, I lunged forward, not away from the entity, but towards the locket. My fingers closed around the cold metal just as the entity's shadowy tendrils wrapped around my arm, the chill instantly spreading, threatening to freeze me solid. No! I screamed, pulling free with a guttural roar, the wooden bird still clutched in one hand, the silver locket in the other. As I pulled away, a strange high-pitched shriek tore through the air, emanating from the entity. It wasn't a sound of anger, but of pain. A ripple of distortion racked its shadowy form, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something within the swirling chaos, something that looked like a face, contorted in agony. The whispers faltered, a momentary break in their relentless assault. The entity recoiled, its red eyes flickering, its form momentarily shrinking. It was as if the touch of these objects, these tokens of human connection and memory, had wounded it. A desperate, wild hope flared within me. These weren't just objects. They were anchors to the living world. remnants of lives that the entity sought to erase. They were proof that these girls existed, that they were loved, that they were remembered. And in this place of oblivion, memory was power. I clutched the bird and the locket, holding them up not as weapons but as symbols of defiance. The entity, though momentarily wounded, was regenerating, its shadowy form expanding once more, its red eyes regaining their malevolent intensity. It was adapting, learning. But I had found something, a chink in its armor, a vulnerability. The whispers returned, weaker this time, laced with a new tone of desperate rage. You cannot fight us. You will not escape. You will join us. All will join us. But I heard something else now too. Faintly, beneath the entity's roar, I heard it. A different whisper, a familiar voice, almost imperceptible. Michael, don't give up. Find the truth. It was Emily, or a memory of her, or perhaps a fragment of her still fighting, still resisting within the entity's grasp. The realization sent a jolt through me, a fresh wave of adrenaline. Emily wasn't entirely gone. There was still a part of her, a part of Sarah, still echoing in this desolate place. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for their memories, for their very essence. The entity watched me, its form swirling, its red eyes burning with an ancient fury. It was ready to renew its assault, to finish what it had started. But I was no longer just a lost man in a haunted forest. I was a brother, armed with memory and a burning, desperate hope, and I would not surrender. The air grew thick with a palpable dread that pressed in on me, stealing the very breath from my lungs. The entity, a swirling vortex of shadows and malice, surged forward. Its form, once vaguely humanoid, now stretched and contorted, impossibly long limbs reaching, tendrils of darkness lashing out like whips. The whispers intensified, 1,000 discordant voices screaming my name, twisting forgotten fears into grotesque new shapes. They burrowed into my mind, trying to shatter the fragile shield of memory I had just erected. You are alone, hissed a voice sharp as splintered bone, cutting through the cacophony. Always alone. She is gone. Forgotten. Just like all the others. But I clenched my teeth, digging my heels into the earth, refusing to be pulled back into the abyss of despair. No, I roared, my voice raw but firm. She is not forgotten. Her name is Jessica, my sister. As I spoke her name, a strange light, faint but persistent, flickered within my mind. It was the warmth of a summer afternoon, the echo of laughter by a sun-dappled stream, the feel of a small, trusting hand in mine. The entity recoiled, a shriek of pure agony tearing through the whispers. It was a sound that made the very trees tremble, of something ancient and powerful being struck where it was most vulnerable. The old man's words echoed in my ears. Asterisk, it feeds on what is lost, on what is forgotten. It thrives in the shadows of despair. Asterisk, and I realized then, with a jolt that sent a surge of defiant energy through me, that my memory, my connection to Jessica, was not just a shield. It was a weapon. I focused, pouring every ounce of my will into that memory. I saw her face, clear as day, framed by unruly blonde hair, her eyes wide with wonder as we explored the woods behind our childhood home. I heard her voice, high and bright, calling my name. I felt the fierce, protective love I had for her, a love that had never truly died, only been buried under layers of grief and self-reproach. The entity shrieked again, its shadowy form flickering, almost dissolving at the edges. The tendrils that had reached for me now recoiled, burning as if touched by fire. Lies! It roared, its voice now laced with a frantic desperation. Illusions! You are broken. You are weak. I am not weak. I countered, taking a step forward, a primal fury igniting within me. I am strong, because I remember. I remember everything. I remembered the promise we made, sitting on a moss-covered log, pinky fingers intertwined. Asterisk, always together, Michael. No matter what. Asterisk, I remembered the fear in her eyes, the last time I saw her, a fear that had haunted my every waking moment for 20 years. And the guilt, its crushing weight, that had allowed this thing to fester in the first place. But now the guilt was transforming, not into despair but into resolve. I would not let it take her. Not again. I pushed forward, not physically, but with the sheer force of my memories. I projected them like a beacon into the oppressive darkness around me. The entity writhed, its immense power struggling against something it clearly did not understand, something it could not consume. It preyed on the lost, on those who had given up. It had never encountered someone who fought back with the very essence of what it sought to destroy. The whispers began to falter, losing their coherence. The faces of those it had consumed, the fleeting specters that had tormented me, now seemed to turn not towards me, but towards the entity itself, their ghostly eyes filled with a new, unsettling accusation. It was as if my act of remembrance had ignited a spark in them too, a flicker of their own lost selves. "You cannot win," the entity bellowed, its form shrinking, condensing, becoming more defined, yet more horrifying. Its eyes, those pinpricks of ancient malevolence, burned with a renewed intensity, but also with a hint of something new: fear. It was afraid. It lunged, a desperate final assault, no longer a swirling cloud but a solid mass of predatory darkness. It moved with a speed that defied logic, aiming to crush me, to extinguish the light of my memory once and for all. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my arms outstretched, not in surrender, but in a defiant embrace of the past. "Jessica!" I screamed, her name a prayer, a shield, a weapon. I remember. And as its shadowy mass collided with me, there was no physical impact. Instead, a shockwave of pure, unadulterated cold ripped through my very being, threatening to freeze me from the inside out. But I held on to Jessica's memory, to the warmth of her hand, to the sound of her laughter like a lifeline. I refused to let go. The entity roared, a sound of frustrated rage and agonizing pain. My memories, my love, my defiance were burning it. It was like acid to its shadowy form. Where it touched me, a faint ethereal light emanated, not from me, but from the memories themselves, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. For a terrifying, endless moment, we were locked in this silent, cosmic struggle. I could feel my strength ebbing, the cold trying to seep into the deepest parts of my soul, tempting me to just let go, to surrender to the sweet oblivion it promised. But then I saw her face again, not as a memory, but as a faint, shimmering outline just beyond the entity's twisted form. Jessica. She was there. She was waiting. That vision, that undeniable presence, renewed my resolve. I pushed harder, pouring every last drop of my being into the connection. The light around me intensified, pushing back the shadows, revealing glimpses of the forest floor, the twisted roots, the ancient pines. The entity began to unravel, its solid form fractured, tendrils of darkness flailing wildly, thrashing against an invisible barrier. It was screaming now, a continuous, ear-splitting wail that vibrated through the very ground. The sound was not just pain but ancient horror, a realization that its reign, its long-forgotten existence, was finally being challenged. It began to retreat, not in an orderly fashion, but in a desperate, uncontrolled scramble. It dissolved, not into thin air, but into countless particles of shadow, each one shrieking as it was torn apart. The whispers faded, replaced by the fading echoes of its screams. The oppressive dread lifted, replaced by a sudden, jarring clarity in the air. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of the spiritual battle I had just waged. The forest around me was still, eerily so. The wind, which had been whipping violently, now barely stirred the leaves. The oppressive darkness was gone, replaced by the faint, silver light of the moon filtering through the canopy. I looked up, my eyes scanning the clearing. The entity was gone. Completely. Only a lingering chill remained, a faint scent of ash and ozone on the air, as if a great malevolent fire had just been extinguished. But then a new thought, a terrifying realization, began to creep into my weary mind. Had I truly defeated it? Or had I merely driven it back? The old man had spoken of its ancient nature, its deep roots in this land. Could something so old, so powerful, truly be vanquished so easily? My eyes fell upon the clearing where the entity had manifested, where Jessica had disappeared all those years ago. The ground there seemed darker, more barren, as if nothing could ever truly grow again. And then I saw it. A single, small, almost imperceptible tremor in the earth, a faint ripple in the forest itself. It was almost like a pulse deep beneath the surface. No, it wasn't gone. It was merely wounded, retreating, hiding, waiting. The victory, if it could even be called that, felt hollow. I had faced the monster, fought it with the most powerful weapon I possessed, and driven it back. But the fight was not over. Not truly. It was still here, embedded in the very heart of these ancient pines, a dormant evil, waiting for another moment of despair, another lost soul to feed upon. I had found Jessica's memory, brought it back from the brink of oblivion. But had I saved her? Or had I just ensured that the entity would never truly claim her, condemning her to an endless silent vigil within its shadowy grasp? The thought was a fresh wave of agony, sharper than any cold the entity had inflicted. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. My legs felt like lead, my head swam, but a new grim determination settled into my soul. If it was still here, then I had to finish it. For Jessica, for all the others. The moon rose higher, bathing the clearing in a stark silver glow. The silence was profound, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I was no longer afraid of the forest, not in the same way. I understood it now, understood the darkness that festered beneath its serene beauty. I had faced the entity, seen its true horrifying nature, and survived. But the whisper of the pines, which had once been a sound of comfort, now carried a new chilling undertone. It was the sound of a wounded beast, biding its time, healing its wounds, waiting for its chance to rise again. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I would have to be ready. The final confrontation was yet to come. I had to find a way to sever its connection to this place, to truly banish it, or risk losing everything and everyone forever. The forest held its secrets close, but I was no longer a stranger to its darkness. I was a warrior now, forged in the crucible of memory and fear. I would not rest until Jessica was truly free. I would not rest until Jessica was truly free. The path back to Eden's Gate was no longer a path of uncertainty, but one of grim determination. The fear that had once choked me was replaced by a cold, searing anger. I knew now what I had to do, and more importantly, I knew who I had to face. Elias, the architect of my amnesia, the manipulator of minds, the shepherd of lost souls who led them not to paradise, but to a deeper, more insidious prison. The commune was quiet when I returned, an unsettling stillness that predated the storm. The flickering lanterns cast long, dancing shadows, turning familiar figures into phantoms. I bypassed the main living quarters, my sights set on the structure Jessica had described in her journal, the sanctuary. Elias's inner sanctum, hidden deep within the most ancient part of the pines, accessible only through a winding, overgrown trail behind the main lodge. The air grew heavy as I ventured deeper, the scent of pine needles mixing with something coppery and metallic, a scent I couldn't quite place but that instantly raised the hairs on my arms. The whisper of the pines intensified here, not just the wind but a complex, overlapping hum, like countless voices speaking just beyond the edge of hearing, weaving themselves into a hypnotic, disorienting tapestry of sound. It was the sound Elias had weaponized, the very sound that had broken me once before. But this time, I listened with a different ear, discerning the artifice within the natural symphony. I found the sanctuary not as a grand temple, but as a meticulously constructed, almost camouflaged subterranean chamber, its entrance hidden behind a natural rock formation. A single, flickering torch illuminated the narrow opening. I took a deep breath, the metallic scent now overwhelming, and stepped inside. The chamber was circular, carved into the earth with rough-hewn stone walls. In the center, a shallow stone basin was filled with a dark, viscous liquid, reflecting the torchlight like a pool of obsidian. Around it, symbols were etched into the floor, not ancient glyphs, but a bizarre fusion of geometric patterns and distorted natural forms. And there, standing before the basin, was Elias. He turned slowly, his face etched with a knowing calmness that made my blood run cold. His eyes, usually so placid, now held a glint of something predatory, ancient. "Michael, I knew you would return." His voice, though soft, seemed to resonate through the very stones of the chamber, amplified by the strange acoustics. "The forest called you back, didn't it? It always does. It whispers its truths and its lies. You wiped my memory, Elias," I accused, my voice raw with controlled fury. "You took everything from me. Jessica, where is she?" Elias smiled, a chilling, condescending gesture. "Jessica sought the truth, a dangerous pursuit in these woods. She believed I was exploiting an ancient power. She was not entirely wrong." He gestured to the basin. "This place. It is a focal point. The pines, the earth, the very air here, they resonate with a unique energy, a frequency that can be harnessed, to soothe, to inspire, to control. You used it to break people," I countered, stepping further into the chamber. "To make them forget who they were, to bend them to your will. You made them disappear." Disappear. Elias chuckled, a dry rustling sound. No, Michael. I set them free. Free from the burdens of their past, the anxieties of their future. Free to live in the eternal present, here with me in Eden's gate. He took a step towards me, his eyes locking onto mine. You were almost there, Michael. You felt the release, the peace. Why did you fight it? Because it wasn't peace. I spat, clenching my fists. It was oblivion. A lie. Jessica knew it. She tried to expose you. Jessica was an anomaly, Elias said, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Her will was strong, too strong for the whisper to fully embrace. She clung to her memories, her attachments. A foolish choice. He raised a hand, and the low hum in the chamber intensified. The obsidian liquid in the basin began to ripple, reflecting distorted images of fear and confusion. But you, Michael, you are different. You have seen the truth. You have felt the power. Let me show you again. Let me guide you back to the peace you crave. The whisper enveloped me, 1,000 tiny needles pricking at my mind, trying to unravel the threads of my identity. Memories flashed before my eyes. Jessica's laugh, my father's stern but loving gaze, the familiar warmth of my old home. Elias's voice, now layered with the whisper, sought to dissolve them, to replace them with the serene, blank canvas he promised. Let go, Michael. Elias's voice echoed, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Let the forest embrace you. Forget the pain. Forget the past. Forget Jessica. But I wouldn't. This time I had a shield. The fragments of memory I had fought so hard to reclaim, the pain I had endured, the love I held for Jessica. They were not weaknesses but my strength. I focused on Jessica's face, her determined eyes from the photo, her words from the journal. Asterisk, he's using the forest. He's manipulating something ancient. Asterisk. No, I growled, my voice barely audible above the whisper but firm. You don't free people, Elias. You imprison them in a gilded cage of forgetfulness. You steal their lives. I pushed back against the mental assault, picturing Elias's true face, the monster beneath the calm veneer. Elias's calm facade began to crack. His eyes narrowed, a vein throbbing in his temple. You resist? After all I have shown you? After all you have felt? He intensified the whisper, and the ground beneath me seemed to vibrate. The symbols on the floor pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. Then you will break, Michael. As all who resist eventually do. The mental battle raged. Elias poured all his energy into overwhelming me, his face contorting with effort, the serenity replaced by a desperate, almost manic intensity. I felt the edge of my sanity fraying, the pressure immense. But then, a different voice cut through the cacophony. Jessica's. Not a literal voice, but the echo of her spirit, her fight, her unwavering belief in the truth. Suddenly I understood. Elias wasn't just manipulating the forest's resonance. He was being consumed by it. He was a conduit, yes, but also a prisoner. The power he sought to wield was wild, untamed, and it was slowly devouring him, twisting his mind, making him believe his tyranny was benevolence. He wasn't just erasing memories. He was draining life, feeding the ancient primal energy he had disturbed. The metallic smell. It wasn't just metal, it was the faint lingering scent of vital energy, of lives slowly fading. You're not in control, Elias, I shouted, finding my voice, pushing through the mental static. It's controlling you. It's feeding on you, just like it's fed on everyone else. My words struck him like a physical blow. Elias staggered back, his eyes widening in a flicker of genuine fear. The whisper faltered, weakened. He had never considered that possibility. He had always seen himself as the master, not the servant. Lies, he roared, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, not with a weapon, but with outstretched hands, as if to physically tear the truth from my mind. But his focus was broken. The powerful mental current he had been channeling, now disrupted by his own doubt and rage, began to turn inward. The obsidian liquid in the basin churned violently, reflecting Elias's terror-stricken face. The symbols on the floor flared, then pulsed erratically. The whisper, no longer a controlled symphony, became a chaotic, screeching discord, 1,000 fragmented voices screaming simultaneously. Elias clutched his head, his hands trembling. He stumbled, falling to his knees before the basin. The energy he had tried to wield, the untamed essence of the ancient pines, overwhelmed him. It surged not against me but against its primary conduit. His body began to convulse, his eyes rolling back. He let out a piercing guttural scream, a sound of pure agony and terror, as if his very being was being torn apart. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The chamber fell silent. The obsidian liquid stilled. The symbols on the floor faded. Elias was gone. Vanished. There was no trace of him, only the lingering metallic scent and the unsettling stillness. It was as if the forest itself had reabsorbed him, consumed by the very power he had tried to master. I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. The silence felt deafening after the chaos. My legs felt weak, but I was intact. My memories were my own, and Elias was gone. But the most crucial question remained. Jessica. I scanned the chamber, my heart pounding. There, in a small alcove-like recess, almost hidden by shadows, lay a figure. It was Jessica. She was pale, gaunt, her eyes closed, but she was breathing. Shallowly, weakly, but breathing. She was alive. I rushed to her side, my hands trembling as I gently checked her pulse. It was faint but steady. She was unconscious, her mind likely in a deep protective sleep after enduring Elias's prolonged psychological assault. But she was here. She was real. Corelli, I lifted her, cradling her against me. She was lighter than I remembered, a stark testament to what she had been through. As I carried her out of that chilling chamber, back into the cool night air, the commune was no longer quiet. The disruption of Elias's power had shattered the illusion. Disoriented, confused, some members wandered aimlessly, others huddled together, their faces etched with fear and dawning realization. The whisper was gone, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. Officer Miller arrived shortly after, his face grim but relieved to see me, and especially Jessica. The commune members, freed from the hypnotic influence, were slowly beginning to remember, to question, to grieve. It would be a long, painful process of recovery, of piecing together shattered lives. Jessica was taken to the nearest hospital. Her physical wounds were minor, but her mind, that would take time. Days turned into weeks. She slowly began to stir, her eyes fluttering open, but there was a vacantness there, a fragility that broke my heart. I sat by her bedside every day, holding her hand, telling her stories of our childhood, reminding her of who she was, of the fight she had fought. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through her hospital room window, she squeezed my hand. Her eyes, though still distant, held a flicker of recognition. "Michael," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Tears welled in my eyes. "Yes, Jessica. I'm here. You're safe." She looked at me, really looked at me, and a faint, tired smile touched her lips. "The pines," she murmured. "They're quiet now." The whisper of the pines had been silenced, at least for now. Oakhaven would never be the same. The commune would be dismantled, its members returning to a world they had almost forgotten. The precise nature of the energy Elias had manipulated, whether it was truly ancient magic or a unique natural phenomenon he had exploited with devastating psychological effect, remained a mystery. But its power was undeniable, and its capacity for both profound beauty and terrifying destruction was a lesson etched forever into the landscape of our lives. I stayed in Oakhaven. My memories were fully restored, but they were no longer a burden. They were a foundation. I helped Jessica heal, and in doing so I healed myself. We walked through the edges of the forest sometimes, but never deep within. The pines still stood, majestic and ancient, their branches swaying in the breeze. Sometimes a gentle rustle would catch my ear, and for a fleeting moment, I would think I heard it again. Not the sinister whisper of Elias, but a soft, mournful sigh, a reminder of what lay hidden beneath the surface, a testament to the enduring wild heart of the world, forever holding its secrets. The forest held its secrets close, but I was no longer a stranger to its darkness. I was a warrior now, forged in the crucible of memory and fear. And Jessica, my brave, resilient Jessica, was truly free.